All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for Men of Mystery 21. My name is Matt. I'm with Mysterious Galaxy, and we're very happy to be a part of this year. And I want to also introduce Jan and Cindy, who are the co-chairs of Men of Mystery 21.
Yep.
So just a real brief introduction. I know a lot of you have already found it, but we've got the chat over to the right here. So feel free to talk along. And I know you all have all of these people's books already, but if you want to buy any of the author's books, there's the buy books here button down below, which will take you to Mysterious Galaxy's website, and you can check out the latest books from everyone. And that's about it. I do want to extend a thank you at the top here to Jan and Cindy and everyone who's showing up. It means a lot to us that you include and support independent bookstores like Mysterious Galaxy and creating conversations in the past. It really, really means the world to us. So thank you. And I'm going to hand it off to Jan and Cindy.
All right. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Cindy.
And I'm Jan.
There you go. And we just wanted to thank you for hanging in there with us. This is our first time using Crowdcast. So we're hoping there will be no technical issues or anything. But because we will be handing the screen back and forth, please know that if it runs a few minutes long, don't be distressed. Just hang in there with us. We're so glad you could join us.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So now, Matt, you're going to invite Rich onto the screen, please.
Rich and Link.
Okay. Thank you. Did he go away? Well, in the interim,
they're invited. This is the voice of God here.
Hi, Rich.
Hi, Rich.
Hi, Cindy. How are you doing today?
Good. We're glad you're with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'll be signing off. I'll see y'all in a bit.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, yeah. All right, here we go. As you know, my name is Jan, and I'm the co-chair for the Men of Mystery. And we are absolutely thrilled with the program today, being able to have Rich interview Lincoln. And also, Cindy's going to be introducing Brad and Hank Philippi Ryan. So it's going to be a great day, and I hope everybody enjoys it just as much as I am and have in putting it all together as well. So my introduction is going to be to Rich. And Rich, there he is managing editor of the State Net Capital Journal. It's a LexisNexis publication that covers state public policy issues and trends nationwide. He also writes a monthly column called Discourse. That is for the Comstocks magazine. And it is a Q&A conversation with some of the Capital Region's legislative leaders and key decision makers. He also publishes hundreds of feature articles as a freelance reporter, with his work appearing in a number of regional and national publications, including Government Technology, Sunset, San Francisco Magazine, Sacramento Magazine, and Capital Weekly. When not tracking the goings-on of elected officials, Eisen is the man behind the Open Mic, a popular blog that features his discussions on writing with authors, writers from across the artistic spectrum. His subjects have ranged from New York Times bestseller regulars Jonathan Mayberry, Jess Walter, Christopher Moore, and R.L. Stein, to publishing expert Jane Friedman, new NPR White House correspondent Tamara Keith, and Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist Jack Oman. He hosts and moderates the Capital Region Writers Coffee House, a monthly networking group of writers, reporters, and editors in the Sacramento area, and is writing a novel, that he actually hopes to get published before he dies. So that's quite a quite a challenge, I'm sure. And therefore, thank you very much, Rich, for being with us and agreeing to shed your expertise on your interviewing with Lincoln. Lincoln, again, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it. Okay.
Well, thank you, Jan. I presume this is where you want me to jump in, so I'm going to jump in. And
that's it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being asked to be here. This is always a great time. Writers are my favorite people. So, Lincoln, I'm really thrilled to meet you. And I'll just say this. I think,
likewise.
To be honest, I don't think Lincoln Child really needs to a big introduction. But I'm going to do it anyway because it's just so fun to hear all of the really great stuff that you have accomplished in your career. Because after starting out as an editor at St. Martin's Press in New York City, where he edited hundreds of titles, both fiction and nonfiction, and then founded the company's mass market horror line, he and Douglas Preston published this little book that you may have heard of called Relic, which only was made into a movie that has become a cult following and led to them co-authoring, or him authoring himself, 25 New York Times bestsellers, including 5 #1s, and selling cumulatively 30 million books. I would say that is a pretty good start to your career. I hope things pick up for you, but I think so far you're off to a good start. Their latest novel, Bloodless, came out in August, and we are going to chat about that one in just a bit. But for right now, I'll just say, all kidding aside, Lincoln, it's really a great honor to meet you. I'm really happy to have a chance to talk with you here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this and for that wonderful introduction. I have to say, I think it's 5 #1s. I'm not 100% sure. I asked Doug, and we couldn't. You said it's the beginning of my career. I'm afraid it's more like the twilight, like the way my brain is working these days. But thank you very much.
Oh, well, let's start out talking about that partnership with Douglas Preston, because it has been one that has lasted longer than a lot of marriages. What has made your partnership so successful for so long? And how do you keep things fresh over all of these many years and all of these many projects?
It's funny you mentioned that because when we first started out, the idea of 2 people writing a thriller together was anathema. I think The Laughing Policeman, written by some people in Europe, was the last one I could think of. And we almost had to get a pseudonym, like Preston Child, for example, before they would publish us. It was difficult at first because Doug had, I had published his nonfiction book, Dinosaurs in the Attic, all about the Museum of Natural History in New York. And then he pitched to me the idea of a murder mystery set in the museum. And I told him that murder mysteries are a dime a dozen. I mean, that's not really true, but they're hard to do well, and it's hard to make any money at them. What about a thriller at a place like that, in the vein of Michael Crichton, say, and do it with me, because I figured that, like all editors, I've read so many books that I knew all the secrets to writing a bestseller. Just slot in, A, B, C, D, and that was all that you needed to do. Which all editors think, by the way. They all have a book under the bed, which is going to be the greatest American novel if they ever finish it, and they never do. So anyway, Doug was now off, headed to New Mexico to be the next John McPhee, and wasn't so interested in writing fiction anymore. But I forced him, out of friendship and just as a lark, to write Relic with me. And neither one of us thought it was going to get published, which is why it's such an eccentric book, because we let ourselves just go crazy and put in all sorts of, things to amuse ourselves. And after it was published, we realized we had to get a rhythm down here to write more. And the way it ended up working is that initially Doug did almost all the writing, and I did the outlining of the chapters. And then after he sent them back to me, I would like run a literary Zamboni over the whole thing and clean it up and add my own stuff. But in so doing, I learned a lot of things. I learned just watching him take my outline and make a chapter out of it. It refueled my own nascent interest in writing, which I'd had as a young person, but it sort of, shriveled in all my years as an editor. You read so many books, the last thing you want to do is go back to your battered Remington at the end of the day, And also, I think he learned from me, seeing me take his Shakespearean prose and just tear it to ribbons, how he could write a tighter novel. And so over the course of several books, we found a working relationship. It began with faxes, believe it or not. It was and like 1,200 baud modems, and of course now we see each other once a year, or for writing tours and things like that. But otherwise, we don't even see each other, and it's probably a good thing, because we would just start drinking single malt scotch and talking about what fine fellows we are. There were some rough moments in it. A few books in, when we were trying to figure out who was going to be the boss and who was going to be the person who did this and that, but you know what? Your mention of an old married couple is right on the money. We carp and we complain like an old married couple, and the sex is terrible. Otherwise, what's really held us together is that we respect each other's judgment a lot. We were friends before we were co-authors, and so when Doug says something, if he says, "Link, this chapter sucks," or this character isn't working out, I respect him, because he's always, he's the smartest guy I know, save for one person, and the same goes with him. And so, we can now finish each other's sentences, and the fact that he is devoted to writing nonfiction alone and writing fiction with me has taken out any kind of competition, between ourselves in that way. So I couldn't do it with anybody else, and it's only because we both have patience, and you got to check your ego at the door. And we realized that if we get into a deadlock, the person who yells the loudest wins, or if that doesn't help, we go to our editor.
I was going to ask how you resolve, like, if you still fight, but it sounds like you probably do. How do you normally resolve those kinds of disputes?
I'm glad that it's only me here and not Doug, because I can tell you the truth. What usually happens is, let's just say, for example, I want a particular scene to end a certain way, or I want a character to develop in a certain way, and Doug doesn't want that. We both approach each other with varying degrees of reasonableness with our viewpoints, and usually one person caves. If not, then we get a bit more strident, and I tend to fight more for the Pendergast series of books, and Doug, is, I think, because he knows that, and he's more willing to let me have my way. And he knows so much about the Southwest and archaeology that I've let him have his say, usually on the Gideon Crew or the new Nora Kelly series of books. But regardless of that, we both have our little darlings, as we call them, and we both know that we have to sacrifice what we think is the best thing we've written. And so it doesn't happen that often, but I'll tell you, Rich, that you mentioned the problems that come with writing with somebody else, but something that we found most unexpected were all the problems that occurred when we went back to writing our solo books, because I was so used to, talking to Doug. It's almost like you're in the middle of a poker game, and you both know the history so far and everything else, and we already how you're going to cheat, with each other, and I can say to him, oh, I don't know what to do with so and so here. Where am I going to go? And he will answer right away. The thing's been bothering me for a year. He'll know the answer of. Or you get to a fork in the road, as you know yourself. Having written in their own words, that writing is a very lonely job, and you get to a fork in the road, and you're not sure if you go left or right. And if it's your own book, if you go right, you may find out 20 forks later you did the wrong damn thing. And with somebody to help you, it's a much less lonely job, and it takes a lot of the pressure off. So you got to split the money, of course, but it's just downside to everything.
Do you change your process at all when you're writing one of your solo books? Because I know writers tend to live by rhythms, right? You write at the same time every day in the same place, and to get that rhythm and get you into flow. I imagine it's that way writing with a partner. So when you're not writing with a partner and you're writing yourself, do you have to change your process as well?
That's a very interesting question. You do, or at least I do, because Doug is very motivated. He gets to his office, which is not in his house. It's, someplace far away, at 9 in the morning or maybe 8, and he works till 5. And I'm usually getting my best REM sleep around that time of the day. And so he pushes me to keep on going. But with my own book, of course, there are two issues. There's getting the time to write my solo books, because I'm always, working literally on 2 or 3 books with him at different stages. The process, either you're reading galleys, or you're writing a book, or you're thinking of the next book. And so I have to wedge my own book in there and get fired up and make sure I have a good enough idea, so that, as C.S. Eliot would say, all the previous books aren't damaged by the latest one you write. You want to make sure that your idea is completely fresh. And you mentioned that earlier. And that's one thing that's really important to both of us, is that if we don't have an idea that we both want to read about ourselves or want to research, we'll keep going, because we live in mortal fear of falling into that treadmill that some writers do after as many books as we've written. And it's easy enough to do, and people do it without intentional designs on it. But having 2 writers helps us a lot to keep fresh, and I rely on him with my solo books as well. So the process for my solo books, to answer your question briefly, is somewhat different in that I require greater motivation, but the process stays the same, except I don't have somebody looking over my shoulder and telling me what I'm doing wrong.
Well, let's talk about your latest book, Bloodless, because it begins with a real-life crime, the D.B. Cooper hijacking in 1971, which is probably the most famous hijacking in American history. What was the impetus for that, for using that as your jumping off point for the next story? Was there something, is that something that's always interested you, or, was there something that sparked using that to get this story started?
Well, the easy part of it was that it was our series character, Pendergast. So we already, the books now flow from one to the next. So we knew how the book would open. So a lot of the work was done for us in terms of setting up characters and scenes and personalities. The real question was, what was his new case going to be? And Doug and I have a Pandora's box full of unsolved mysteries. For example, the Dyatlov Pass that he wrote about in the New Yorker recently, the mystery of that, or the mystery of the Victoria Peak in the Southwest we wrote about in our recent Nora Kelly novel. And so Doug in this case, said, "Hey, what if we read about D.B. Cooper?" And I said, "Okay, that's a great idea. Who's that?" Because I'd never even heard of D.B. Cooper. I know it's terrible to say, but as soon as I did, it struck me as a great idea because we love nothing more than to take an old mystery, or even better yet, a mystery people think is solved, and then find that people have the wrong answer to it, and that we have the right answer, or our character has the right answer. And so our problem became, of course, not only how to inject D.B. Cooper, may he rest in peace or whatever, into our story, but how to make that relevant 40 years later and make it a new challenging tale. And that became our problem, but hopefully that was what made it interesting for the readers. But that's really how we begin. We bounce ideas back and forth. We BS, on the phone, brainstorm for hours until we get an idea, and then we slowly bounce back and forth with developing an outline. And once we have enough to actually write outlines and say a dozen chapters, we start divvying them up. And when we divvy them up, it's always by character or by sequence or by event. It's not like you write chapter 1, I'll write chapter 2, because that would be a big mess. This way we can slot the pieces together, and it makes for a much more smooth process.
Well, I want to stick on that theme for just a moment because I just finished reading Old Bones, and you mentioned Nora Kelly, and of course that was she was one of the protagonists in that book. But so, as someone who grew up in Northern California, and particularly the California foothills, and knows a lot about the area, Truckee, California, and that whole area, spent a lot of time backpacking and hiking in that area. I was really fascinated with the connection with the Donner Party. And I just love how you use that seed of that very real story, that very real tragic story, to create a fabulous piece of fiction. I was really impressed with that. I know you guys do this a lot, but let me ask you about the research part of it, because you mentioned D.B. Cooper, where you weren't even familiar. I think most people are familiar a little bit with the Donner Party, but to write the story you did, you had to know an awful lot about what happened, what didn't happen, so you can use that as your seed for creating the story. Tell me a little bit about that, the research that goes into writing a story like that.
Well, we have a leg up on our fellow writers, and then there are two of us. So Doug has he's like a polymath when it comes to science, and the Southwest, he rode on horseback 1,000 miles across the Jornada del Muerto, almost dying in the process. And so he knows that area very, very well. I know a lot about eccentric parts of history and computers and things like that. So together we make one pretty decent, brain. The research is what's most fun for us, because in the case of D.B. Cooper, you mentioned, Bloodless, we had to figure out, well, not to give too much away, not only how to blend what actually happened in the eyewitness accounts, which of course we had to read over very carefully. We didn't want people writing us saying, you got that wrong, you got this wrong, and blend that with our own fiction to make it seamless. And it started with our first book, Relic, where if you start out with a brain-eating monster that grew out of a plant, people are going to say, what the hell are you trying to, but if you start with a lot of scientific, a foundation and real science, and you build on that and build on that, by the time you get to the brain-eating monster in Act 3, you've suspended disbelief in people, and that I think that occurred with Bloodless. Again, not to give anything away, but the reason D.B. Cooper, what he was doing and why he was still around, or in the case of Old Bones, you mentioned the Donner Party. That's a perfect example of your asking how we get ideas for books. Doug has often been fascinated, as I'm sure you were, as a kid, and even now, with what happened to them? What an awful story. And then the survivors. So I mean, we wrote a book about Oak Island, the treasure off the coast of Virginia or wherever it is. Same kind of thing, where it's made people fascinated for years. I mean, we take this and build our own story. And so in the case of the Donner Party, Doug and I had to find something new, but we had to base it on the truth, obviously. And so we did a great deal of research into where they were. Doug had actually ridden and hiked up in the area. And so you, having lived there, probably know the area pretty well. So that he got all the locale details correct, all the set dressing, basically. And then to make it our own story, we said, well, okay, there were 2 camps, but what if there was a third camp nobody knew about before? And this happened there, and this awful thing happened there. And by creating a third Donner camp where only 2 had actually existed, we gave ourselves this huge amount of leverage to add our own embellishments to the real story, but slide them in a way that seemed quite hopefully believable.
Your stories all have such really fascinating characters and wildly imaginative plots, and that's what makes them such fun reads. And I'm always curious, do you more often start with characters that you build storylines around, or do you have storylines that you fit around characters? Which way is the most common for you when you're starting to create a new book?
The most common way is to start with an idea germ, like D.B. Cooper or Victoria Peak or Oak Island, and then build the story from that. Populate it with the most interesting characters we can think of, characters that maybe have some of we know, have some facts we know about or want to learn about. An archaeologist, a maritime engineer, whoever it might be, a sheriff who lives in the middle of nowhere in Arizona. And then we populate the story and then take it from there. That's been changed somewhat now that we're doing series books, because early on we wrote a series of books after Relic, 3 or 4 books where the characters were different in every case, and that was extremely difficult. I mean, it meant a lot more work up front, just having to create new characters every time. And then I had the idea in a book called Thunderhead to bring in this guy, Bill Smith, back, who had been a journalist in Relic. And Doug said, okay, yeah, let's put a journalist in there. And I said, no. Let's bring back Bill Smith back and just not say anything, not say that he was in an earlier book. And that began our process of sort of creating what I've always called our metaverse, but maybe that word is copyrighted by Facebook now. I don't know. But in any case, our books overlap. So many characters and plots overlap that, make a long story short, we now have the characters up front, or at least 50% of the characters. So it's still the idea that comes first, but we know what the characters are, who are going to be involved, and what they have to do about it.
Do you have, and you may not want to answer this. This may be proprietary information at the moment, but do you have any storylines right now that are brewing around in your head that you can share with us, that we might see in the future?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I just finished a novel a week ago of my own. It's been a long time in the brewing. It's a Jeremy Logan novel. He's my character, who's an enigmologist. He in the old days they had supernatural sleuths and they had ghost breakers in the old Penny Dreadfuls, in the pulp magazines. He's a modern day incarnation of that, but he also, his powers just go beyond ghosts and the occult to be dropped into a situation where nobody has come across this kind of problem before. And he has the skill set to see outside the box. And so the latest book, I am trying to think how much I can say. Let's just say that it has to do very much with the metaverse, as Zuckerberg is now beginning to talk about, but in a way that I've been writing about for 4 years, where it's a combined universe where everybody has a part, but there's a commercial backbone to it. And I mean, this goes back to William Gibson, and Neuromancer, and farther back than that. But things go horribly wrong, and as is often the case, my book is set in a very unusual place. As Deep Storm was set in the bottom of the sea. I set Terminal Freeze in this swamp called the Sud, south of Egypt, where nobody can move around because it's so horrible. This is set in a equally remote and bizarre location. So that's coming out, I hope, next summer.
Well, that sounds fabulous. Are there storylines? I mean, you guys have such a breadth of storylines. Are there any that we should never expect to see, that you don't ever see yourself taking on, and you feel like maybe they've been done to death or something along those lines?
That's a very good question. I can tell you this is only a partial answer, but for example, for the longest time, I've been fascinated by Disney World and the fact that there are tunnels underneath, and what you see on the surface is completely artifice, and below there's this humming complex just to make it all look natural and, smiling and everything else. And I wanted to write essentially a thriller, a Die Hard style thriller set in a theme park. And I said, oh, no, I don't like theme parks. I hate Disney, And so for years I was pitching this idea to him, and no, that's not my cup of tea. And then he went off and decided to write a novel on his own. He declared one day. And so I said, oh, well, okay, I guess I'll write a novel set in a theme park. So that's only a half answer to your question. But there are ideas that when we're pitching ideas, they often come thick and fast. And, the nice thing about having two people is I will say to Doug, no, you can't write about, Leonardo da Vinci. It's been done already. Yeah, but Link, I had this idea where, no. And so having two people involved helps. But there is no one idea that we have said is verboten. There's except things that would get us in trouble. We want to keep writing and do it, with in our comfort of our own offices. So other than that, we want to entertain people, and if we can find an old topic people think they know all about, but find that they don't really know about it, it's fair game for us.
So I mentioned that you have this really fabulous collection of characters that span many of your books, a lot of overlap. It's a little esoteric, but if you could bring any one of your characters to life, do you have one that you would choose?
Yes.
I'm putting you on the spot, like picking your favorite child.
No, if I could have Constance Green as a friend, or a relative, I would pick her. I wouldn't want her to come back as an enemy, but I'd love to have her as a buddy or a cousin or a sister. She's Pendergast's very strange ward, and I want to apologize here now to everybody who asked me, where the hell did Constance Green come from? Because it's a very convoluted story, and you have to explain it to people who don't know would spoil it for everybody else. So, but if you read Cabinet of Curiosities, you will know where she comes from. And she's young in a way, but she's also got a streak of homicidal anger in her when it comes to people who trouble her loved ones. And she's fascinating, talented, beautiful, yeah, come on, Constance, appear like Athena from the forehead of Zeus right now.
I think most people can see you have a guitar on the wall in the background. I know you play a couple of different instruments, maybe several instruments. Yes, there was another one. I guess let me ask this two ways. What's your favorite guitar, number one? And then how does playing music affect you, affect your writing, impact your writing? I see Jan, so I know we got to make this quick.
Okay.
So I'll ask you to do it quickly.
My favorite guitar is a Stelling Song of the Mockingbird 5-string banjo, actually. I love banjos because they're so have such a bad rap right now. People think of Deliverance and everything else, but I love the in-your-face syncopated twang of the banjo, and I've inserted it into several books. Makes a great butt of jokes for Doug. But I'd say if I had to choose one, it would be that ES335 over there. Thank you. Rich, these are great questions, and you were very kind to listen to me at great length, talk about my little darlings. Thank you so much.
Oh, the honor is mine.
Thank you, Jan.
All mine.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you both so very much. I think that through the chat box, everybody's been making nice comments. We did not want to take the time away from the actual interview in order to field questions. So I'm so glad that you were able to really communicate as much as you have. And thank you again, Rich, for your expertise. And now yeah, definitely. And thank you again. And we're going to turn it over to Cindy and Hank and Brad.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And
thanks,
thank
everybody.
You so, really,
Thanks,
really
everybody.
Great job.
Hi, all. I was just waiting for Hank and Brad to join us here. Here comes Brad. Perfect. There we go. Wonderful. Well, that was a lot of fun to listen to them. It's going to be equally as much fun to listen to the two of you. I'm going to do a brief introduction of Hank, and then I'm going to drop out. She's going to introduce Brad and take it away. Hank Phillippi Ryan is the USA Today best-selling author of 13 novels of suspense. She's won multiple prestigious awards for her crime fiction, including 5 Agathas, 4 Anthonys, and the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. She's also the on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV, where she's won 37 Emmys, 14 Edgar R. Murrow Awards, and dozens of other honors for her groundbreaking journalism. National book reviews have called Hank a master of crafting suspenseful mysteries and a superb and gifted storyteller. Her novels have been named Best Thrillers of the Year by Library Journal, New York Post, BookBub, Pop Sugar, Real Simple Magazine, and others. Her 2020 thriller is The First to Lie. It garnered a star review from Publishers Weekly and is a nominee for the Anthony Award for Best Novel and again the iconic Mary Higgins Clark Award. Her newest book, Her Perfect Life, is a thrilling, chilling psychological standalone about fame, family, and revenge. It received starred reviews from Kirkus Reviews and Publishers Weekly, which called it a superlative thriller. We're delighted to welcome Hank Phillippi Ryan.
Thank you, Cindy, so much for having me today. It's such a joy here with you all. And weren't Lincoln and Josh amazing? They were quite spectacular.
Yes.
Hear how an author's mind works is always wonderful.
Right. Okay, I'm going to drop out, Matt.
This is the magic of Crowdcast. I have no idea how this works. Welcome, 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 Brad, and welcome to all of you. That interview that Cindy read of mine was way too long, so thank you for sitting through that. And what I'm going to do with your bio, because we write suspense, is just loop it out to you all a little bit of at a time. So let me introduce to you the fabulous, amazing, you know him, Brad Thor. His newest book is Black Ice, which look how fabulous this is. Brad, welcome. I'm in Boston. I know you're in Nashville, in this gorgeous, gorgeous room.
Yeah, so this is a little space. It originally was set up as a conference room just off my writing area. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I had wanted to switch everything up and move the conference room out into the writing area because nobody was going to be here, and then bring the furniture that was a kind of a sitting area by my writing desk in. And it's turned out to be a lot of fun. So, you know, it took the pandemic for me to switch things up a little bit, but I enjoy it. I got my bar over here. I got a bunch of real cool things throughout the office. So it's kind of a neat little space inside. Now it'll go all fuzzy, the camera, because I'm off. There we go.
No,
yeah, pretty cool.
Well, thank you for giving us this tour of your writing space. It is quite spectacular and so elegant with the Concord and all of your books. I mean, your writing is so adventuresome, and so there's so many expeditions and so many journeys that I think it's interesting that you write from this gorgeous space, but your books are so expansive. Let me read a little bit more about what Brad's past is, so you get a little bit more bio. Here's the next section. Brad Thor is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 21 thrillers, including Near Dark, Backlash, one of Suspense Magazine's best books of the year, Spy Master, declared by the Washington Times as one of the best all-time thrillers, The Last Patriot, nominated as Best Thriller of the Year by the International Thriller Writers Association, and Blowback, one of the top 100 killer thrillers of all time by NPR. And of course, this new Black Ice. When you hear that list of all your accolades and all the books that people have loved so much, what is the Brad Thor book DNA? What are you getting when you get a Brad Thor book?
You know, it's funny because there's no formula for me. Each book is organic. My buddy, Dan Brown, and I know that Link kind of referenced him when he was talking about Doug having an idea about Leonardo da Vinci, and Link saying, no, it's already been done. We can't do a thriller, Doug, about da Vinci. But Dan is a real outliner. And Dan and I share the same agent. And at one point, my agent said, Brad, I know you're very seat of your pants, very organic with your books. You sit down every day at your desk, not knowing what the next word is going to be, what the next scene is going to be. Maybe Dan will share with you the outline for Da Vinci Code. And Dan and I are buddies, and he's the sweetest guy in the world. And he said, yeah, I'll share it with you. And so I got to see the whole original outline for Da Vinci Code, which was kind of neat to see what didn't make it into the book. Different action scenes and puzzles and things like this. And so I sat down and outlined a thriller and tried to write it, and I couldn't. I just ran out of all of the kind of passion fuel, if you will. And I tell people, I like to quote the Robert Frost line, which is no joy in the writer, no joy in the reader, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. So I want to have the same experience writing my thrillers that you do reading them, Hank. I want my palms to sweat, my heart to pound, and I want to go home not knowing what's going to happen next. And I joke that my wife can tell what kind of a day it's been in the office, whether it's a red wine night or a bourbon night, based on the expression that I have on my face when I walk in the door. Because I paint myself into a corner. I go to bed not knowing how I'm going to get out of it. But as soon as I sit down at my desk the next day, I figure it out.
How do you, I mean, I write exactly the same way quickly. I love Dan Brown. I love his brain. I love how his mind works. He is the sweetest, most wonderful person in the world. But I have tried to write an outline. I have tried. My editor says, can you just send me an outline? And I say, no, because how do I know what happens until it happens? And it doesn't happen until I write it. So that's what gets me to the computer every day as well, trying to figure out what's going to happen next. There's and when you write yourself into a corner, I always think about this Thomas Edison quote, who said, when you think you have exhausted all of the possibilities, remember this, you haven't. And that just, you know, Edison was right. Edison was saying, it's not that there's no answer. It's just that your brain hasn't come up with it yet. And that glorious imagination that writers have Don't you embrace that? Aren't you fascinated by that every day?
I am, and I actually have taught myself to appreciate those moments where I'm kind of blocked and I don't know how I'm going to get my character out of the corner that I've painted him into, or her, because it means that the reader's not going to know either. I don't want the easy way out. No Deus Ex Machina, that kind of a thing. So it's important for me that the book is challenging to write, because hopefully it will be very enjoyable to read then. It'll be complex. I'll surprise the reader. And so that's part of the DNA. Other than that, I always tell people action on page 1. That's a hallmark of one of my thrillers. Always start with action.
Well, I know I love the beginning of In Black Ice, which is that something happens and the main character, Scott, knows that if it goes wrong, there's no one who's going to come to save him. Now, talk about tension. The thing about your books also, in this book particularly, shows that is that you have this terrific main character who's smart and determined and experienced and also emotional. He is loving. You have the incredibly high stakes, the smart, strong female character, an amazing setting, and just a wonderful story, just a page-turning story. In what order do those come to you?
So that's a great question. So you were in TV before you got into books, is that correct, Hank?
Yes, I'm still in TV. So
and you're still in TV.
It's all about storytelling.
So you and I are the same. I was actually in television before I became an author. So I was the producer, writer, and host for a public television travel series called Traveling Light. I loved travel. I loved being immersed in other cultures. And I wanted to share with my fellow Americans, don't wait until you're retired to go see the world. Do it now, because travel made me a better American. I really appreciated seeing my country from abroad and understanding all of the wonderful things that I enjoy as an American citizen. So I had this great series on public television. I actually did it. My distributor was out of Boston, where you live, American Public Television. And on my honeymoon, my wife asked me, what would you regret on your deathbed never having done? And I said, writing a book and getting it published. And she said, okay, when we get home, you're going to start spending 2 hours a day, protected time, making that happen. So the writing experience for me was always about these lush, incredible international settings, but weaving it in with real world events. I call what I do faction, where you don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins. So my number one goal is to give you a white knuckle thrill ride. I want you to enjoy the book, really have short, crisp cinematic chapters. And if you close it and say, wow, what a ride, great, I've done my job as an author. If you close it a little bit smarter, knowing a little bit more about how maybe a certain agency in the intelligence community works, or a certain special operations team, or a big geopolitical issue that America has a little bit of its Achilles heel exposed to that issue, if you're smarter from reading one of my thrillers, as well as being entertained, I think then I've done my job, not only as an author, but as an American.
And it's interesting too, because as a journalist, one of the goals of being a journalist is not only to offer information, but to change the viewer's or reader's world a little bit, that you're a different person when you close the book. And let me read another part of your bio, because this is interesting too. This says, known for his innovative plots and extensive knowledge of intelligence, special operations, and terrorist communities, Brad has appeared on, and then it lists every television network on the planet, to discuss terrorism and current events, as well as exactly as you're talking about, as well as how closely his novels of international intrigue parallel the real threats facing the world. That's so interesting, isn't it? How real life parallels fiction and your fiction parallels real life, and they're so seamlessly and gorgeously woven together. I always say, I want people to miss their stop on the subway because they're reading my book. And that's exactly a Brad Thor book as well. Talk a little bit about those connections.
So for Black Ice, this year's thriller, I'm a voracious consumer of news. So you're awesome. I'm going to put you on the payroll. This is one of many reasons why I was so excited that you and I would be doing this together. I am a voracious consumer of news. So whether it's my nightly newscast locally, whether it's national news on TV, I subscribe to a ton of different newspapers. I'm always bringing it in. And I'm also, it hasn't happened as much as I would like during COVID, but I'm a big buyer of pitchers of beer and steak dinners for people in my network, if you will. And I used to always ask the same question. I still do. What keeps you up at night? But in the last couple of years, I've added another question that I think you'll appreciate, Hank, being a journalist, which is, what issues do you think aren't getting enough attention in the news? And that's been a really cool question to ask, whether it's somebody in government, whether it's somebody in the espionage business, whether it's somebody in special operations. And what I found is it was a brand new question that brought in all these new answers. And so one of the things that came up, and it became kind of the facts of the faction of Black Ice, was that China was pushing into the Arctic, that China had declared itself a near Arctic state. Well, that's a made up term. It's the Seinfeld of diplomatic terms, because the nearest Chinese settlement to the Arctic Circle is over 800 miles away. But when I started digging in and asking people, why do you think China's interested? What is China doing? What are you worried about happening up there? I learned all this fascinating stuff about China teaming up with the Russians and these attempts to push us out of the Arctic, and how many resources are up there. And the book is not about the changing temperature in the Arctic, but the Arctic is warming 2 times as fast as anywhere else on the planet. And so the sea ice is melting for longer each year, which opens up a sea route over Russia from China, which would allow the Chinese Navy to come over if they want to, Chinese merchant vessels. There's a certain national security risk for us. But also with China and Russia trying to stake out claims in the Arctic to box us out so that they could get a hold of oil, natural gas, rare earth minerals that we absolutely depend on, and China's trying to corner the market on, it just became too irresistible of a geopolitical set piece not to take that and wrap a spy thriller around it.
Well, that's interesting, because 3 levels of questions about that. One is, how, you are so experienced, and you have talked to so many people about so many international situations. What was it like to hear that this China situation was on the top of people's minds? Was that something that was new to you? Had you thought about that before?
I had not. And so until I was told about it, I wasn't even, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times. I was not reading about this as an issue. And I was surprised. Foreignpolicy.com. I mean, I've got all these places that I'm a subscriber that I go to. I try to get my news from a wide variety of sources. In fact, recently in an interview, somebody asked me what I thought one of the greatest national security threats were to the United States. And I said Facebook. And I said, people who predominantly get their news from Facebook in Facebook groups or on specific pages. I said, that's one of the greatest threats to national security, is people not casting a wide net to get their information and to weigh different sources against each other. But this idea of China and the Arctic, I actually have a relationship with a former national security advisor who told me, everything that you want to know that's going to happen in the Arctic, look south at Antarctica and what the Chinese have done there, where the Chinese have militarized their research stations, which is completely against the rules, how they're trying to put these protected domes over areas where they're doing research and they don't want aircraft flying through there. There is a lot of interesting stuff happening, right down to the fact that I didn't know we had only 2 Coast Guard icebreakers, one of which is basically out of business because it's so out of date it breaks down all the time, and that China's been building up their fleet as Russia has, and that we're actually falling behind in icebreakers, and that China's race to build icebreakers is part of its plan to box us out of the Arctic and get a foothold up there. It was just one of the most fascinating thrillers to research, because there was so much real life intrigue going on.
I was just saying, you're fun to talk to, Brad. Oh, that's great. I think it's a red wine night. Let me know your research, though, because you're so conversant in this right now. But the book comes out as being authentic and exciting, but not sort of packed with research. It feels real and seamless. You're really taking the reader to this astonishing setting with an incredibly high stakes problem, and you draw people in. How do you, when you do research, when you do all this research and you fill your brain with that, How do you distill and decide then? How do you switch on your fiction brain, your storyteller brain, and put all that in?
So Elmore Leonard had a great piece of advice for writers, particularly young writers, which is, he had two pieces of advice. Never start with the weather.
Yeah.
And the second piece was leave out the parts that people skip. I'm a huge Clancy fan. I don't think I've ever read every single word in a Clancy novel ever because I skip. I don't need to know how a guidance system on a missile works. All I need to know is that there is a team of two people. They've got they're painting a target with a laser, and the missile recognizes the laser on the side of the building, and that's where it hits. I don't need to know about the gyroscope in there and what kind of fuel it uses. My dad is so funny. My dad is a no longer active Marine, and he always used to claim that Clancy must have gotten paid by the word because there were so many words in Clancy's books. And listen, Clancy was a fantastic author. I love Clancy's writing. I'm not a fan of the detail stuff, so or too much detail. I think detail's important, but you can put people to sleep, and also writing changes and entertainment changes. So it takes a lot of self-discipline to sit down, block out the world, and read a novel. And so I'm different in the sense that, like I said, I try to do those short, crisp cinematic chapters. But your question is fantastic because I do a ton of research, but then you have to decide what makes it into the book and how do you put it in there. I had a guy at the CIA take me to task over a novel a few years ago because he said it would never happen like that. There would be 8 people between your protagonist and the guy he needs to get to. And I said, yeah, that's great, but I'm not writing a training manual for Camp Perry, the farm, where you guys train new intelligence officers. My readers aren't going to sit through 8 meetings across Vienna. I'll do it in 3, and you've got to understand that's the difference between writing fiction and nonfiction. So I like to get the big, broad brushstrokes of why you as the reader should care about this. Why should you care that China is doing this thing up in the Arctic? Why should you care that this deal happened with Russia and nobody knows about it? Probably one of the biggest compliments I get paid, Hank, is people love to read my thrillers with their laptops open because they come across stuff and say, oh, that can't be true. Thor must have made it up. I'm going to Google it or Bing it, whatever. And they're like, wow, sure enough, that's legit. That's one of the things that people enjoy about my novels is that they're really easy to read. I don't bog you down with the details, but you do close them smarter and having learned more about the world.
I know I had a wonderful editor once who, when I would pitch ideas to him, he would think about it, and then he'd say, why do I care about that? Why do I care? And it's a really interesting way for an author to think. You know, that's what distills the idea to the essence, is what's going to keep the reader caring about this. I mean, you were talking about, I love how you just throw into your conversation, I had a CIA guy call me and take me to task. You know, most people just don't get calls from CIA guys. I know that here's another part of your bio that goes right into this. It says, Thor was recruited into the Department of Homeland Security's Red Cell program, an elite group of writers and artists commissioned to brainstorm terrorist scenarios for the U.S. government. So let's just take this word by word. First of all, recruited? So somebody called you from Homeland Security and said, hey, Brad?
Yeah, so it was, I always tell people when I tell the story, it was like something out of a movie. I was living in Park City, Utah at the time, and I was hiking in the mountains with my dog in a place where I could never get cell service. Never, ever, not a single bar. And I'm hiking and my phone rings. And I got this invitation, would you come to DC? We've put together this thing called the Analytic Red Cell Unit. And I said, absolutely. For me, it was an honor. Like I said, my dad's a Marine, no longer active, and I was being asked to come serve my country, not by picking up a rifle like he did, but by using the gray matter between my ears and my creativity to help keep the country safe, to help keep us 4 to 5 steps ahead of the bad guys. It's one of the greatest honors of my life.
So, okay, but tell us about that. What did you do? How did that work? What was the goal? What were you asked?
So I will start this by saying that the Red Cell program, I jokingly referred to it as the Las Vegas of government programs, because what happens in the Red Cell stays in the Red Cell. I can say this, that they did publish one scenario that got published in the newspapers to give Americans an idea of what was going on behind the closed doors of the Red Cell. And that was, they had war gamed how terrorists might take advantage of an approaching hurricane to kill Americans. And you might not think that that's necessarily two things that would go together, but they were worried about Americans being put into shelters where they were all close together and potentially hitting a shelter. And then there was also the fact that we move a lot of rescue equipment out of the path of the storm to a marshaling yard, maybe up from the coast or something like that. And what would happen if they destroyed the equipment, whether it was bulldozers, ambulances, things like that. And so that's the only one that they've ever publicized. But basically, they had me in there, Michael Bay, the director of the Transformers movies and the 13 Hours Benghazi movie. And the idea was, they did a couple different things. They either give us pieces of just random things that we didn't think were connected. And we kind of wondered, is this intelligence that they have that they don't know how to put together? And they've asked us, okay, if you've got a phone that was found in an abandoned vehicle on the border of Syria, a pair of Michael Jordan, Air Jordan sneakers that were paid for with the same credit card, and those were found in Kuala Lumpur. And then there's a hairbrush that had 3 letters and a string of digits written on them that was found in Auckland. How might those connect? So you'd have weird stuff like that, and then kind of freeform stuff where they would say, what do you think are targets that we should be looking at in this sector, both at home and abroad? So there was it's difficult to take artistic people and to kind of keep them on a path and not have them go off. And it's like herding cats to a certain degree, but they were really good at it. And I have to tell you, it was probably the most forward-thinking and aggressive government program I've ever been exposed to or even heard of in my life.
Had you heard of it before?
I had not heard about it before. No, I had not heard about it. When I got the phone call, I had not heard about it. And I was told I couldn't talk about it. In fact, I came up with a scenario in the Red Cell for an attack, and it happened somewhere in the world. And I said, can I go on TV and say I had this idea? And they said, nope, we do not discuss what we come up with.
It's fascinating because the thought process that goes into that kind of brainstorming, that sort of like Lincoln and Doug do, that brainstorming has to do with not only with real life, but that's how fiction works. It's about stakes. It's about motivation. It's about goals. It's about secrets. It's about what someone wants and how far they'll go to get it, and how might they do that? Did your storytelling play into that a lot?
It did. That's why I was being brought in to do for them what I do with my own novels. But that being the Las Vegas of government programs, I could not take anything that was developed in there and put them into my books. But I think one of the ways that I was able to be helpful in that program is that I treated it the same way I treat writing a thriller, which is it's like having a still pool of water and dropping in a stone, and it ripples outwards. But with a thriller, you have multiple stones, and you need to be cognizant of where the ripples intersect. And you have to address every time those ripples intersect. So it wasn't just, oh, I've got an idea for an attack. It's who could be behind it, what would they gain, all this kind of stuff. So you had to be able to think on multiple levels and be cognizant of where those ripples hit each other.
And just like creating a novel, you're creating a new world where this situation exists, and then see how the dominoes fall in that world. My husband is a criminal defense attorney, and it's interesting. He'll come home with the facts or evidence of a case, and he'll say to me, here's what we have. We have this report, we have this surveillance, we have this transcript, we have this wiretap, we have all these things. What do you think about that? I mean, he had a case recently where his client was on video on the subway, on video on the sidewalk, on video opening the door of an apartment building, on video walking in up the stairway to the apartment, and then 3 minutes later, running down the stairs out of the apartment, running out of the building, running onto the subway and making a phone call. They had all of that. So I thought about that, and I said, well, do they have video of what happened inside the apartment? And Jonathan said, no. And I said, okay, well, what if the murder victim was already dead when he got there? He went into the room, he opened the door, he saw, oh no, dead guy, slammed the door and ran out. That's what you would do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly, I mean, is that what it was like, only on a global level?
Yeah, it was interesting. We didn't necessarily have all of that information where we could piece together that many things and then come up with a kind of counter narrative as to what happened. It was more, like I said, along the lines of some disparate pieces that they couldn't connect, that weren't leading to any narrative at all. So they were entertaining. How might these things connect? And if you're connecting them, what are you using as filler? What should we be looking for that might link? You know, it's like a frog jumping over lily pads, but they're not close enough, and we need something between these two lily pads. What might that look like?
I love
that kind of a thing.
I love that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But you were talking about not writing with an outline. And so those kinds of, all those possibilities have to appear to you as you're writing without an outline. Do things happen when you're writing that you didn't predict? And how much does your research sort of fill in and inform those gaps between the lily pad in your books?
Yeah, it's hard because those gaps are less facts. They're less the research and more, I've got to make a creative jump. There's an author, I think his name is James Jenkins, and he worked on the Left Behind series. The guy's written an absolute ton of books. And I stumbled across, I believe it's James R. Jenkins. And I read, or I watched a video of his. I was just falling down a rabbit hole. You know, writers, when they're supposed to be writing, are cleaning their offices, cleaning their garages, cleaning their closets, right? We get distracted. But I stumbled across this great video about the writing process and punching through perfectionism and punching through writer's block and things like this. And one of the things that Jenkins said, which really resonated with me, is he talked about that specific thing you just asked, is filling in those gaps. And he said, if you're not sitting in front of the computer actively trying to write, your brain isn't going to spark. You can mope around and clean your garage and do all that kind of stuff, but you have to be in front of your keyboard for those sparks to happen that give you those things that you need to put in those gaps. And so a lot of procrastination and writer's block can come from, I don't know what I'm going to write next. But the other great line is if the tap isn't open, the water don't flow. So you need to be sitting down, no browser windows open, you know, no browser tabs open, none of the distractions, and allow those sparks to happen. So for me, it's more that creative process than anything I might draw from research-wise, although research might give me a location idea or something like that. There may be something from the research where I'm like, oh, you know what, I did want to write about that. That's a really cool thing that may help me kind of slingshot around the issue I'm dealing with and get the gravitational pull of the moon to whip me over that other thing.
You can use whatever we can. I know there was one day when I was sitting right at this very desk and I said, you know I need to write, but I think I better go alphabetize my spices. And then I thought, yeah, sit there, sister, and write your book. Yep. I know I read a wonderful thing that said, the muse only comes when you're working. And that, you know, that really spoke to me completely. She wants you to do your job, and then she will offer you the ideas when you're ready to accept them. Let's talk a little bit more specifically, though, about this fabulous book, Black Ice, because the setting is so daunting and the setting is so incredible. Talk about how you created that and how you made it so authentic.
Well, I got to go to Norway to do research, which was great. So the kind of the log line for if this was a movie poster, let's put it that way, that if I was pitching this in an elevator, it would be America's top spy has had a great summer with his love interest in Oslo, in Norway. But he's out of sick days, out of vacation days, and his job back in Northern Virginia, the agency he works for has said, you're either back at your desk Monday morning or we want your resignation. And so he's in the business of making sure that Americans can enjoy their lives. There is no American dream without those willing to protect it. And so he decides he's going to go back, and he lets his girlfriend know, and they've decided, okay, we'll see each other next time we can get vacation days. And he's living up his last few days in Norway. And as he walks out of his favorite cafe, he sees someone get out of a cab that he killed several years ago halfway around the world. And that sets off this great chase from Oslo all the way up into the Arctic Circle. I got to do my research and everything in Oslo and in Norway, but I did not get up to the Arctic Circle because of COVID. So I was supposed to go back and go to this great archipelago about 500 miles north of Norway, halfway between Norway and the North Pole. The Norwegians govern it. And I was really looking forward to seeing it. And then, like I said, coronavirus happened and I had to cut that trip short. But through my network, I was able to find somebody who had gone over and had visited, had taken a bunch of pictures, particularly of the Russian mining town there, which is a fascinating story. Russia's got the northernmost consulate in the world, is in Svalbard. When you turn on your cell phone, if you dare, it automatically goes to a Russian service. So this Russian cell phone company grabs all this information about you and your phone. And it was kind of neat because this guy had gone and snuck around and done some very interesting things in that area and was able to provide me with a certain amount of photographs that he was allowed to share.
We'll talk about
cool.
We'll talk about a chilling read. You know, that's got a big double meaning in Black Ice because the stakes are so high. It is so grim and so bleak and so cold. And I love that moment at the beginning of your book where he sees the person that he killed, and you see, you're so smart and you're so good because my reader brain said, oh, well, he didn't really kill him. So you say in the book, you know, he waited to make sure he was dead. So you say to the reader, you know,
you're not dead. So my wife is a physician and she always says, you're not dead until you're cold and dead. And so I knew that's what readers were going to think, is that Harvath stood there till he was cold and dead. And Harvath did stand there until he was cold and dead. But I took the readers and spun them in a different way.
And also you raise the stakes for the reader then. You think, well, Brad got me with that one. I wonder where he's going to go with this. And I wonder how he's going to get out of it. Which, speaking of which then, since you don't outline, how much did you know about this story when you started?
Well, it's interesting because I knew I wanted to open the book with action. And so I opened with a scene, and then that was the prelude. And then chapter 1 was 72 hours earlier. So I knew that by the end of the book, I needed to come back to that scene. And I put in clues in this scene that I didn't know if I was going to use. So I got a little bit of the ending, and I see, speaking of endings, looks like we're getting close to ending this interview. But before we do, let me just say, Hank, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to meet you and be on a dais with you over the summer. And you are so delightful. You're so knowledgeable about writing. I enjoy your books. I hope everybody, if they haven't read one of your books, actually goes out because they are as fantastic as you were introduced. So thank you for doing this with me.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Well, one more time, let me just show you all Ice, which Mysterious Galaxy has for you all. Please do not miss this. From the opening sequence on the helicopter, you will not be able to put this down. It is really a page turner. And Brad, thank you. You know I am such a fan, and I wrote down everything you said, and I'm going to make a T-shirt out of it.
That will be a good T-shirt.
I have a million questions.
Yes.
We'll do it next time.
Great. Thank you both. We appreciate Hank and Brad joining us. That was a delightful conversation and really interesting. And now I'm scared half to death for the future. Yeah. But we thank you all for being with us and sharing your expertise and your books with us. And thank you, Hank, for holding up the book often. That was a really lovely thing. We're getting ready to close out now. I don't know if Jan is coming back on with me or not, but we did want to thank Mysterious Galaxy for hosting this for us. And we hope that you all will buy books. If you remember when you signed up, the Mysterious Galaxy offered a $5 discount on books that are purchased through their website. So we do appreciate that. And thank you everyone for coming and attending. I hope you had as much fun as we did. Thank you so much. Jan?
Yes, and thank you, Brad, so very, very much, and Hank as well. It is absolutely delightful. You two are so professional. It was fabulous. Okay, well, my part of the ending of the session right now is to remind everybody that we are having our 2022 in-person event on November the 5th next year, and it's going to be at the Grand in Long Beach, which is a lovely facility. And I know it's a long way for both of you to come, but if you would like to come and join us again, we would love that to happen. And Brad will have to talk to David that he needs to send you.
Oh, there you go. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd love to.
And that would be great. And also Hank. And also, well, let me see. What else did I have? Registration for that will probably open around September 22nd. And we wanted to also thank everybody that signed on and registered to see everybody in this program. And I have to say that you, Hank and Brad and Lincoln and I and Rich have sprouted over 125 people to come on this live, which is pretty exciting. And thank you again, everybody. And I guess that's it, aside from our Mysterious Galaxy partnership. And we want to thank them for introducing all of us to Crowdcast, which has been a bit of a challenge for some. And me, and last night it was, or 2 nights ago, it was Hank when she was doing another program. So again, thank you all. And Cindy, thank you for being my co-host or co-founder and good grief, co-chair. And I guess that's it. So thank you, everybody. And have a great rest of the
Thank you, Jan.
day. You're welcome, Cindy. And so that's it. Thank you very much, and farewell.
All right.
And I can't say anything else. You're just great.
Thank you, everyone. And just as a reminder, if you want to use that
That's
$5 off, just put your Men of Mystery and then your little Eventbrite registration number in, and we'll remove that when we process your order. And thank you so much to Men of Mystery, Jan and Cindy, and Brad and Hank and Rich and Lincoln for joining us. This was such a great event, and I enjoyed the conversation so much. So
Matt,
I'm gonna
Matt, one more thing. Also, a lot of people were asking if you were recording this, and I believe you had made a note of that it is being recorded. And so if anybody was late getting in or unable to make it, that they would be able to view the whole thing.
This will be available in perpetuity. So
oh dear.
Just come back to this link, and you can rewatch it at your leisure.
Fantastic. Again, thank you for all of your technical expertise.
You're quite welcome.
Okay.
I will end this here. So goodbye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you.
Bye.